Now we know USC will be entering its transition to the Big Ten under different leadership. Welcome to the Voice of College Football, USC. We appreciate your contribution right here. Please hit the like button on your way in. Get that out of the way. Join the chat. Leave those comments and questions there in the chat on another edition of Trojans Live right here, the Voice of College Football. And the guy that makes this all happen is Matt Zemek. Catch his work on Trojans Wire. Matt, how you doing tonight?
Well, another busy May weekend. Bronny James was the first weekend of May, and now we have the Mike Bohn story on the third weekend of May. So, there's a certain CBS Sports college basketball commentator who is fond of saying, "We sleep in May." Not for me, and not at Trojans Wire. This has been a very busy month of May. So I'm staying on my toes, and so like the fascinating thing. Let's get right into it with Mike Bohn's resignation. And now, first of all, it certainly seems warranted. Like this wasn't like one or two complaints. There were at least a dozen complaints, and Ryan Kartje of the Los Angeles Times was the lead reporter on this. So like he talked to at least 6 sources from both USC and Cincinnati. So like this is not one or two people. This is widespread. And I think that for me, in many ways, the big story is, wait, there were incidents at Cincinnati and they got past the vetting process when Mike Bohn was hired at USC. I mean, that's notable. And of course, it doesn't necessarily mean that USC conducted an insufficiently thorough investigation. Maybe it was just a case where no one stepped forward. But I would say that, if you're playing in the big leagues the way USC is, you would think that you could at least turn up something. If there were several people at the University of Cincinnati, like the investigation wasn't able to find any of those several people. So obviously, whoever was doing the investigating was doing the vetting. Someone dropped the ball at some point. So maybe not necessarily, we go all the way to the top in President Carol Folt, but, it's the people that she hired, the people in charge of vetting Mike Bohn. Someone did not do his or her job at some point along the line. That's pretty notable. And then the other big part of this is that, Mike Bohn was extremely talented at the thing that athletic directors are fundamentally paid to do, and that's hire coaches in the revenue sports. I mean, what Mike Bohn did in the office, that's one thing. And obviously he didn't live up to professional standards and expectations of how one should conduct oneself. But boy, in terms of, the meat and potatoes and why athletic directors get hired and why they get paid very big bucks, he was great. Like what he did in the office does not change the reality that he was extremely talented. And let's keep in mind here that obviously when hires are made, we focus on, the vetting of the hire, and we look at it usually from the administration side, from the side of the school, looking into, the new athletic director they're hiring or the new head coach that they're hiring. But it's not as though, let's look at it from the coach's point of view. It's not as though the coach has to take a job. Like no one's forcing a coach to sign on at a new school. And just in appreciating the skill of Mike Bohn in convincing coaches to come to USC, high quality coaches, not just Lincoln Riley, of course, but also Lindsey Gottlieb in women's basketball and Andy Stankiewicz in baseball. USC about to probably make the NCAA tournament in baseball after an 8-year absence. These coaches, they can do vetting, right? I mean, they're not using a search firm the way schools do. Schools have the resources to, employ investigators, search firms, and all that. But coaches can do their digging, and I'm sure that a coach, when at least offered a job or at the more initial stages, an interview with an institution such as USC, with an athletic director such as Mike Bohn, I mean, of course, these coaches are going to ask around to their colleagues, their friends in the business, fellow coaches, assistants, administrators at other schools. I mean, they're going to ask, hey, was this guy, did he do a good job at his previous stop? Is this an athletic director I should work for, that I can work for and would enjoy it? And this is not to be critical of the coaches that Mike Bohn hired, only to point out that he sold them. He convinced them. What Mike Bohn put forth, these other highly credentialed, high quality, proven coaches, they said, yes, I want to work for Mike Bohn. Yes, I want to work at USC. So it's not a criticism of these coaches. It's just a point of Mike Bohn was really, really skilled at landing excellent coaches. And so it makes all of these background details, the things that led to Bohn's resignation, so surprising. And it's not that human beings are complicated. It's not that human beings might project something in public in a front stage context and be very different people in a more private context. I mean, those points, we see them, we've seen them before, we will see them again. That's not the central insight. The central insight is, wow, human beings are really complicated, and human beings can be really artful in some aspects of who they are and what they do. And that doesn't mean that they're going to, that skill or that natural relational ability is going to translate into anything else. It's just, I marvel at the complexity of all of this and how a person, Mike Bohn, can be so titanically gifted and yet have these uglier aspects to his daily actions and also to his professional conduct. It's just, it gives one pause, but it's just so striking to see two very different dimensions in the same person at the same time at USC and going back to Cincinnati as well.
Yeah, we've had this conversation regarding head coaches mostly because, of course, they're in the spotlight, that there are individuals that, yes, can be so talented, so gifted, so on point in one area of the profession, and then so blind, so unaware in another area of the profession, or just as people that invades their professional conduct and prohibits them from being all that they can be and gets in the way of their talent and ability. So my thought as soon as I saw this news break was, okay, Mike Bohn comes to USC from Cincinnati in 2019, and I'm a football guy, so I'm not thinking about the other sports, and it is the revenue sport, but still the other sports are important. But I'm thinking, okay, there are situations in which, okay, this is a highly competitive industry. It's about winning and it's about money. It's about those two things and the connectedness between the two. So we see it all the time where whether it's coaches or ADs are very likable people, hardworking people, but just didn't cut it, didn't win enough, didn't raise enough money. You're gone. We liked you. Sorry. It's a profession. It's a business. Bye. And then you've got a situation where you could see a combination of, well, this person's performing. Rich Rodriguez comes to mind. I think his last season at Arizona was 7-6. He was kind of middling. He was doing okay, especially for a program like Arizona, but he had some off the field issues and kind of the merging of, okay, the performance on the field is not overriding. It's okay if he was a model citizen, we would probably keep him, but he's not. Therefore, the issues off the field merged with the not so great performance on the field. Bye. With Mike Bohn, the two things that came to mind was, okay, here's an athletic director that hired Lincoln Riley, and then whether he should be given any credit for this, still the move to the Big Ten and the big coup for the athletic department and the football program in particular, moving to the Big Ten under his watch. What did he do wrong to be ousted? Well, we quickly learned all you have to do is look through the, as Matt outlined, the complaints that came in. And they were complaints that go in a lot of different directions. They all have to do with conduct, but You're talking about inappropriate comments, physical gestures toward women. Then you've got also showing up late or not showing up for meetings. Then you also have things like not showing up apparently to USC national championship victories, and just a lot of absenteeism out of Mike Bohn. And then on top of that, inappropriate behavior.
Yeah, there were layers to this. And, included in this is that a few coaches said that, the things that they had to deal with Mike Bohn or why they had to leave, which is even more of a contradiction when you realize that, Lindsay got, now let's look at Lindsay Gottlieb, for instance. She was an assistant coach in the NBA with the Cleveland Cavaliers. Not many women are assistant coaches in the NBA. Not many women get to that point. And Mike Bohn convinced her to leave that with the Cavaliers to come back to college basketball. And she had previously coached at Cal. Just that example, like Andy Stankiewicz wasn't like a coach with the assistant coach with the New York Yankees, and Mike Bohn lured him from like that kind of position. But like Gottlieb was in the NBA, and Mike Bohn convinces her, hey, come back to college basketball. And yet you have other coaches, being so disappointed with Bohn and how he conducted himself that they left. And Karchi and the LA Times didn't reveal who those coaches were. But so, even more complexities in terms of the Mike Bohn story. But, this is so widespread in terms of the sourcing, in terms of people at Cincinnati, at USC, in a range of different contexts, as you mentioned, Mark, like that, the number and diversity of complaints in terms of, having the right culture, the right values, the things that USC President Carol Folt mentioned in her letter on Friday afternoon. There's no doubt that a change had to be made. As many great things as Mike Bohn undeniably did for USC athletics, I mean, like, those things stand, those things remain, that Mike Bohn immeasurably improved USC athletics on the field in terms of donations coming in, because under Clay Helton, Trojan fans were withholding donations, and may I add, rightly so. Like, they were, voting with their checkbooks and making sure that, hey, change needs to happen. And Mike Bohn not only made those changes, but he made great changes. And USC athletics is in such a great spot now, and it makes this job so much more attractive than it was 2, 3, 4 years ago, than when Bohn came aboard. In fact, replacing Lynn Swan, who was a disaster as an athletic director. So, like, in terms of a lot of measurable elements, Bohn definitely improved USC athletics exponentially. Yet, you can't have this kind of behavior, the kind of behavior that, was alleged by so many different people over so many years, going back to Cincinnati. So it's just it's jarring. And yet the other thing, though, and this is a source of, minor relief within this, larger context of an unfortunate collection of events for USC, because this is not what anyone wanted or hoped for. But the one source of relief is that, this was not like some cancer on the program, a full departmental collapse. This is not that. This is Bohn's personal conduct. Everyone else in the department, or at least, going by all the reportage that we've been reading and following over the past 48, 72 hours. It's not as though anyone looked up the other way. It's not as though Carol Folt was ignorant of this. Like, she heard the complaints and she launched a review. So she seemed to be pretty responsible. Maybe, some finer details will emerge, but it really seems as though, hey, complaints emerged, word got around of, there being problems. USC, by all appearances, acted on that. So, like, that was healthy. That was responsible. There's no like larger taint seeping into different personnel, different aspects of various athletic departments. So that's good. So it's not some broader structural issue. I mean, now people will talk about the vetting of Bohn at Cincinnati. But other than that, like there's no larger structural, weakening of the foundation of the whole USC athletic department. So like within this larger context of an unfortunate development, that is like a really good news and a definite source of relief to USC fans. Like this wasn't a whole bunch of people in the athletic department dropping the ball. This was fundamentally Mike Bohn not behaving professionally.
Join the Voice of College Football community right here on our USC channel. We've got memberships available, and you can join us by just going to the front page of the channel, hit the join button, and we've got exclusive content available. And we want to thank our 7 members: Bernardino, Joey, Little Peep, Cole, AC, BMJB1, and William. And we've got Hal as well. Thank you so much, all of you, for joining us for exclusive content for the USC Voice of College Football community. And again, folks, you can join that by hitting the join button on the front page of the YouTube channel right here at the Voice of College Football USC. Our current content library there for exclusive content includes the discussion Matt and I had about Lincoln Riley's producing NFL quarterbacks, that long line of, who is the best, who's the most impressive product out of the Lincoln Riley line of quarterback prospects moving on to the NFL. We've discussed Alex Grinch's role and his ceiling at USC and what bar he needs to reach. We've discussed the addition of Bear Alexander and what that means to the USC defense and also the transfer portal. And we will provide many more content offerings as well as we move forward.
And it's the off season, folks. Like if you want deeper dives into specific topics, like these exclusive YouTube segments here at the Voice of College Football, that's meeting your need. But of course, in modern times, content producers, journalists can't put everything out there for free. We have to save some things behind a paywall. And, with artificial intelligence, like my job might be obsolete in a decade. Like I'm very aware of that. Like I might have to find a different line of work. We'll see. It's very unsettling. But like right now, if you want to feed Mark and myself, join at least the middle membership tier so that you get these exclusive YouTube bonus segments and support both of us here at the Voice of College Football.
We also, of course, want to remind everyone that coming up on June 4th, that is the time and the date in which you can hear from one of the great all-time Trojans and one of the great players in the history of the NFL. Anthony Munoz will be joining us here on Trojan Conquest Live with Tim and with Rick. That's Sunday, June 4th. That's at 8 o'clock Eastern time. That's 5 Pacific time. Anthony Munoz, need I say more? Arguably the greatest left tackle in the history of both college and professional football.
And here's a note for USC fans based in Los Angeles. Game 2 of the NBA Finals starts pretty much right when that Anthony Munoz show airs on Trojan Conquest Live. Well, the Lakers are done. So, there's no conflict between Anthony Munoz and a Laker game anymore. The Lakers are not going to be playing on that NBA Finals Sunday. So, even more reason to get to Tim Prangley and Rick Anaya for the Anthony Munoz special at Trojan Conquest Live, Sunday, June 4th, 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific.
You are catching me up to what's going on with the NBA because the last I saw a clip with LeBron lamenting having to face Steph Curry, and that's the last I heard, or possibly having to face him. And I have not followed the NBA playoffs since the last time LeBron and the Cavs walked off the floor against the Warriors, and when my son was highly motivated to watch, and I watched with him.
Tim Prangley's wondering why I'm talking about the NBA. I'm only saying, there's no conflict now for Angelino sports fans. All of them can get to Trojan Conquest Live. There's not going to be a Laker game competing with the Anthony Munoz show.
Okay, Matt. Now that Mike Bohn is moving on, as he stated, going to focus on his family, and he is part of USC history. The next question obviously brings us to who is going to lead this athletic department into the next era of competition in the Big Ten.
So here, and this harkens back to Trojan Conquest Live with Tim and Rick every Sunday. Their most recent show was an excellent one. Had a great deep dive conversation and a look at USC's next athletic director and possible candidates with Tony Altimore laying out his big board. And I love the way Tony segmented his discussion, because he looked at, you got to make a phone call to these 6 candidates. You got to make them turn down the job. Then looked at, some proven athletic directors who might want to take the next step, some group of 5 athletic directors who might be hungry for their first really, really big chance in the industry. They're working at smaller programs. Maybe they're ready for the big time. And then some outside the box candidates, and then some in-house candidates. So a lot to consider. Not going to go through all of the 24 candidates, because you want to watch Trojan Conquest Live. If you missed it, you can just go there. It's the episode number 12 with Tim and Rick and Tony Altimore, and also Fight on Rusty as well. Made some great points, made some great suggestions, and had some insights on potential athletic directors. You want to watch that whole show, but just to focus on a few, I think, particularly relevant candidates from Tony's discussion on Sunday. Pat Chun, so was at Florida Atlantic. And on the Trojans Wired podcast, my producer and co-host, he's a guy named Ian Hest. He knows Pat Chun really, really well. So he can vouch for him from having worked together at Florida Atlantic. And then what you're seeing at Washington State, and Washington State's athletic program has definitely improved. When the women's basketball team won the Pac-12 tournament, first time ever, Washington State had done that. So you're seeing growth in a lot of different programs, and the football program is respectable. So you give Pat Chun now the ability to make the step up to USC. I think he'd be an excellent candidate. And in terms of my own coverage and analysis at Trojans Wire, I view Pat Chun as one of a handful of guys, also gals, one of a handful of people who, if you give them the USC job, they're not going to fail. I think there's a certain subset of candidates where, you hire them, you're going to get quality. You're going to get good, responsible, smart stewardship of the program. Pat Chun, I think, is definitely one of those candidates. Another particular person we focused on at Trojans Wire, Brandon Sosna. Now, he's on the young side. That is true. But the one box he definitely checks right off the bat, he is tight with Lincoln Riley, because he was instrumental. If you go back and recall late November 2021, he was right there helping Mike Bohn land Lincoln Riley, getting him to come to USC. And it's pretty obvious you need an athletic director who works really well with Lincoln Riley, whom Lincoln Riley will enjoy collaborating with in the Big Ten. Brandon Sosna, perhaps more than anyone else. You could mention Clark Stroud, who's been Riley's director of football ops at Oklahoma, came with him to USC. I think that you don't really need to change Clark Stroud's position. So Sosna in some ways makes really good sense just in terms of the Lincoln Riley angle. Now, in terms of oversight of the whole USC athletic program, that might be where he falls short, and where he might not yet be fully ready. Handing him the keys to the whole program, that is certainly a limitation. But getting that Lincoln Riley box checked, that's certainly important, and that contains value. And then the other in-house candidate that we've written about at Trojans Wire, and we did that today, Monday, if you're watching live, just to kind of timestamp it, is Ed Stewart. And looking into his deeper profile, he's worked for the Big 12 for a decade and a half under Bob Bowlesby, the previous Big 12 commissioner before Brett Yormark. So he helped write out bowl contracts. So he's definitely well-versed, very knowledgeable about the innards of the business of college football. That's a great thing to bring into the Big Ten, a great thing to bring into, all the changes that await USC. And then you look at his education and his administrative background. He spent time within the football program at Michigan State, Big Ten. He played at Nebraska, and of course, he played at Nebraska well before the Huskers came to the Big Ten, but nevertheless, so he has substantial institutional knowledge of a couple different Big Ten schools, and one of them being in the Central Time Zone, one of them being in the Eastern Time Zone. So, like, when we get into USC Big Ten scheduling and television arrangements, and like what works for USC, what's going to be good for USC football players and USC student athletes across the board, hey, Ed Stewart, more than most, is going to have a really good idea of, you know, what to protect, what to secure, what to obtain from the Big Ten to the extent that he and USC are able. Very, very attractive in-house candidate, and I think a better overall candidate than Brandon Sosna. When you look at the full portfolio and you consider the decades of experience in college sports administration, if USC is looking for an in-house candidate, Ed Stewart is the guy. So those are a few candidates that we've written about and studied at Trojans Wire. Now, you know, others are going to mention, you know, some of the big hitters, you know, maybe Chris Del Conte from Texas or Danny White at Tennessee. Some of the other names that got some mention on Trojan Conquest Live on Sunday. But, you know, like there are people who, you know, have not been the athletic director of a you know, a top tier superpower program who, if given the chance to do so, I think they would be highly likely to succeed at USC. So Carol Folt and the university have a lot of attractive candidates to draw from. And of course, again, because USC athletics is rising across the board, and, you know, ironically, because of Mike Bohn's ability to hire the right coaches in various revenue sports and high profile sports, this is an attractive job. So USC is going to get the pick of the litter. It's going to get the cream of the crop. And one should feel very confident that the Trojans are going to land on a great athletic director for the future in the Big Ten.
USC Trojans Live right here at the Voice of College Football every Monday night at 8 Pacific time with Matt Zemek from Trojans Wire. Check out Matt's work, of course, there on Trojans Wire. We appreciate your comments and questions. We will get to some of them. You can highlight some with a super chat, and we will be able to pick those off right away. You touched on this to a certain extent with mentioning many of these candidates, Matt, but I'll take it a little bit further just in case you've got anything else on this portion of the conversation. And that would be, for you, are there particular qualifications, characteristics that you think they're looking for or that you would be looking for?
Well, you know, what I said on Trojan Conquest Live when I ducked in for my customary like 20 minutes on the show. And by the way, Tim and Rick, if you're watching, like during the regular season, during the football season, I'll be on for, you know, extended visits. But like in the off season, you know, I got to kind of, I got to do my own load management in terms of use of time and everything. But anyway, what I said then is something I'm going to repeat here. And that is that, all right, you know, we can toss around names and candidates and specific portfolios and resume points. We can do that all day long. But here's something worth focusing on. And that is, and we often talk about this when we deal with coaching hires in the football industry. It also applies, of course, to hiring an athletic director. And that is, the right questions need to be asked in the interview. And so let's deal with that. Like, what are the questions that Carol Folt and whoever else is sitting in the interview room need to ask a prospective USC athletic director? So one is, you know, how are you going to work with Lincoln Riley? 2, how are you going to work with Alex Grinch? 3, how are you going to handle a Lincoln Riley, Alex Grinch debate situation, conversation if USC's defense does not perform at the expected standard? Because let's say, you know, okay, if USC goes 12-0, like, okay, Alex Grinch, come on back for 2024. And if USC goes 8-4, goodbye, Alex. You know, it's on to a new defensive coordinator. But like, what if USC is 10-2, you know, decent, but not fantastic? What if the defense is, you know, a little bit better, but not great, or at least not good enough to get to an 11 or 12 win plateau. Like, what if that performance, what if that standard is kind of right in the middle, and it doesn't easily answer the question or resolve the argument either way? That, like, if we get that scenario, will the new USC athletic director be able to lean on Lincoln Riley, have a frank conversation with Lincoln Riley, and get good answers and get accountability at the defensive coordinator position? And maybe that means keeping Grinch for one more year, keeping him into the Big Ten, where the style of play is different from what we see in the Pac-12. And of course, the Pac-12 is going to have some loaded offenses this season. The Big Ten in 2024 not likely to have nearly the same level of across the board firepower that you're going to see in the Pac-12 this year. So really, a good interview, a good interviewer is going to ask the prospective athletic director, how are you going to handle these questions? How are you going to handle these tension points? So that has to be one item that gets asked of athletic director candidates. And then moving down the line, like, what's your short list of defensive coordinators? Do you have an idea? Do you have a roadmap? Do you have a plan? And like, how is USC going to compete in the Big Ten? And how are we going to handle travel, logistics? What, when a new college football television package is announced in 2026, how does USC fit into that picture? What can the Trojans pursue? How are you going to work with your fellow Big Ten athletic directors? So lots of questions we can come up with. And, so a responsible interviewer is going to probe all those different pressure points, all those different angles, making sure that, of course, like, in addition to, departmental organization and professional conduct, like, those are not necessarily simpler conversations, but conversations where, like, it should be known what the standard is. So we can go through questions on those items, but like defensive coordinator, handling Lincoln Riley, Big Ten scheduling, and what the Trojans can do and achieve, and also obtain in terms of like revenue, in terms of getting good treatment from the Big Ten. It's important that whoever gets the job, that the right questions are asked at the interview table to make sure that the candidate who gets selected is ready to meet a very different set of challenges in the future compared to what past USC athletic directors have had to face.
Of us are on the internet pretty much all the time. It's fun. You get to socialize, you get entertained, and in this day and age, it's pretty much necessary. And even if you're one of those people that's not on the internet all the time, you know what is? Your personal information. And there are people out there trying to hack you all the time. They want your email address, they want your phone number, they want your place of employment, and they want to do bad things with it. There's also fairly legitimate corporations and companies that want your information. They want it for marketing purposes. They're going to buy it, they're going to sell it, they're going to trade it. At the very least, it's annoying to you. It's a nuisance, it's aggravating. Your email gets cluttered up with spam email. You get robocalls all the time. That's at the very least. At the worst, it's a threat to your family, to your friends, to your personal information, to your banking, to your finances, to your security, to your safety, to your identity. It can be pretty serious. This video is sponsored by Aura. I got hacked and it was pretty obvious. This was about 8 or 9 months ago, and there were red flags all over the place. And I didn't exactly know what to do, but I knew I needed to do something quickly. I mean quickly. I researched 8, 10, or 12 companies immediately. I went all over the place. I asked people. I was online looking for the best company that could serve my needs and secure my information. You know who I found? Aura. And I'm glad I did. It was amazing. I contacted them. They got right back to me immediately. Their customer support is phenomenal. Their customer service is first rate, friendly. They are detailed. They know what they're doing, and they do it right, and they will protect you. In addition to everything I just mentioned, they've got a password keeping service. They keep your credit score. They notify you anytime there's a possible data breach. This has happened to me a number of times. I'm getting notifications all the time when there's a possible compromise to my credit score or anything that I don't want. They've got a VPN that will allow you to browse the internet anonymously. It's amazing. And again, customer service support available 24/7. Click the link in the description section below and get 2 free weeks of Aura. Protect your finances, protect your information, protect your privacy, protect your identity. I did, and I'm glad I did. Aura, thank you so much for what you've done for me, and now for my Voice of College Football community. Identity theft, unfortunately, is a big deal. So protect your family, protect your identity, protect your finances. We have left the link in the comment section. Matt, did you have a chance to see this story that broke today? Pete Thamel was the guy, I believe, out in front of it regarding the Big Ten television deal, and specifically the miscommunication between Kevin Warren and the hierarchy of the Big Ten.
Looked at pieces. I didn't read the report all the way through, but like this, what this reaffirms is that, Kevin Warren and Big Ten leadership, the presidents and chancellors at the school, they were definitely not on the same page. Like that, that story confirms everything that we know and everything that we've heard about the relationship between Kevin Warren and the presidents. They were never on the same page, and it was a bumpy ride all the way through. And I think the point of intrigue that this raises is, we talked last week about Oregon and Washington being, quote, vetted and cleared, unquote, for the Big Ten. And, the Big Ten members, including and especially Ohio State, they don't want a whole bunch of added members to the Big Ten. They don't want this endless expansion. And yet Kevin Warren was able to, bring USC and UCLA in, but the membership was not uniformly on board here. And so this just makes me even more convinced that bringing Oregon and Washington in, that doesn't seem likely. And I think with the mess that's now unfolding the conference, what people are learning, what Thamel and others have unearthed with a new commissioner in, it certainly seems like this is a conference that's not in position to continue to add. Is that the conference has to clean up its own house a little bit. These are not the circumstances in which you bring in new members. There's a lot of cleaning up to do in Chicago in Big Ten offices before we can really have a serious exploratory conversation about new members coming in. So I think that really puts the brakes on talk of a continued expansion process in the Big Ten.
Slap Happy, thank you so much for reminding us to put the Amazon link in the description section as well. So everyone, when you use Amazon, if you just use that link that we dropped in the description, it's in the description section, but we also dropped it in the live chat as well. I have tested this out with so many people just to make sure. And I've said, if I'm on the phone with a friend or whomever, I've said, use this Amazon link, tell me, and they'll use it right there. They have said many times, it's the same exact way I shop on Amazon right now. So there's nothing that you need to do, anything special. You're automatically signed in. You just click on that Amazon link and you send some partial credit, 2%, 5%, depending on the item, to the Voice of College Football. So we appreciate that. It doesn't cost you a penny. The thing about this television deal, and it's just strange to me because, again, it's almost like in some ways the Mike Bohn look, optics, the evaluation of the job done, because if you step back and you look at the 3 major components, the 3 major marks of Kevin Warren's tenure with the Big Ten, for me, it would be the COVID year, the 2020 season, all that had to be dealt with. I don't take that lightly. I know he was in a tough spot, just like every other college commissioner. However, in my estimation, he botched that. I'm not going to go through the whole deal, but there are a number of ways in which he botched that. At the time, a lot of people connected to the Big Ten in media thought that that was going to have lasting ramifications, that was going to have consequences against the Big Ten long term. I don't think it has. So he has been very fortunate there that the Big Ten recovered very quickly. There are lost revenues there that extrapolate beyond for a few years. But in regards to reputation, brand, all of those things, didn't seem to be any kind of impact. Now, the two pluses, and we could debate or conjecture in a lot of ways how much he had to do with these, but again, he's the front man, he's the guy that gets the credit, would be USC, UCLA to the Big Ten, and then this massive television contract. And those are the high points, obviously, and that's, to me, what is going to be the legacy of Kevin Warren.
No question. Like those are the things that you immediately look at. And the other point here, and it's not really even a criticism, it's just like it's a conspicuous aspect, is that as soon as these major deals were sewn up, that Kevin Warren left town. And like that's the other really notable aspect of all this, is that in some cases people are long-term stewards of an athletic program or a conference, and they really want to see things through. They want to be there for the long haul. Kevin Warren just seemed interested in doing this deal with USC and UCLA, and then didn't want to stick around to kind of carry it through. Didn't want to stick around to make the Big Ten football schedule with USC and UCLA. Like that is still being negotiated. Big Ten has not arrived at its plan, still hasn't unveiled its scheduling rotation. So Kevin Warren obviously didn't have an appetite for those kinds of things. And maybe, Mark, maybe the thought process there is, wow, I just made this huge splash, and it's not something that the entirety of Big Ten membership was on board with. So maybe Kevin Warren thought, well, this is as good as it's going to get. Like I've brought in revenue to the conference over and against the objections of some of my partners. Like now trying to hold this big battleship together, no mas. I'm going to let my successor do it. And, maybe just in terms of cold political calculus, maybe not the worst move in the world for Kevin Warren. And now he's in the NFL, and, he helped the Vikings build their stadium. So now he's going to help the Chicago Bears build what, one would think would be a retractable domed stadium. So you don't have bear weather anymore, or at least you don't have to have bear weather anymore in December. Maybe you get Chicago a Super Bowl at some point in the next 10 years with the retractable roof. So maybe that's just what Kevin Warren enjoys in life. It's making a deal and hopping to the next gig. He's like the Larry Brown of deal makers. Larry Brown being the
Sure
NBA coach who would fix a team right up and then go somewhere else. Like he was the nomad. He was the ultimate basketball nomad. And it seems that Kevin Warren really is like the sports administration nomad of our time.
Because at the time that he took the Bears job, I was kind of weighing, is that a better job? Is he leaving his job, as it just seems to be much more high profile, the commissioner of the Big Ten, rather than being kind of not buried in the front office. He's at the top of the rung, but with the Chicago Bears. But certainly the NFL is the NFL. It rules American sports. So, but I was thinking, okay, well, he grew up in the NFL to a large degree. Maybe that's where he feels comfortable. And I got to say, on the surface, I would much rather work where it's just business, business, business. Sure, there can be personnel issues and decisions and politics that going to permeate some things, but it's basically business, 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 as opposed to the mess that's going on in collegiate athletics right now with all the things that you need to take into consideration. So I could understand that. Now that this has all come out with this deal, I don't know if he just thought, you know what? I've got this deal, the framework of this deal, and it's going to be signed, and everyone's going to be so happy with this deal. They can find out later that there are going to be some things involved that they don't like. But do they really want me to go to them back and say, we got a $7 billion deal, but NBC's not paying $350 million a year or $350 million total for a compromise on the nighttime, the prime time window. So what are we going to do about that? And just, you know what? They'll deal with it later. They'll like it. How can they argue with a dollar amount? You know, that they'll deal with it later. And like I mentioned on our Big Ten show that we did earlier tonight, the Big Ten has had this policy against November night games. Okay. Now, we're not even involved in this situation. And as soon as the deal was struck, and it was CBS, NBC, and the Fox contingent already there, and saw that the NBC window was going to be a 7:30 Eastern time game, well, did no one... I just can't imagine that there was not back and forth. You know, I likened it to something that I was dealing with, take this sponsorship deal, any of these things, I'll have like a 2-hour conversation, and then I'll even email later and say, oh, I forgot about X, Y, and Z. Can you answer these questions? And then there might be a follow-up conversation and then more questioning. I just can't imagine that that those questions weren't tabled there by athletic directors and other administrators. And I don't know if he just wasn't forthright with that information, or I can't believe that out of 14 schools that they didn't follow up to say, wait a minute, we've got a November policy of night games. What's going to happen there? What's going to happen with this? What's going to happen with that? And this overlap of the contracts for the championship game between Fox and NBC. I don't know. It's just rather odd. I don't remember hearing of anything like this before.
Yeah, there's no question that it's bizarre. Like, you would think that these things would be ironed out and there would be absolute clarity. Like, television deals, like these things should be pretty spelled out, and they weren't. And we're still, like, I'm reading the chat as well as you are, and people are guessing in terms of, what's going to happen in late November, and which schools are going to be in the night games and have certain slots. And we're all just speculating. And like, for the Big Ten to not deliver at least a certain degree of clarity on this. And also, as you mentioned, like, members should have known that, like, if USC and UCLA are joining the Big Ten, that means night football is coming. Like, you're not gonna have Western schools, prominent Western schools coming into your conference, and other Big Ten schools not playing a 7:30 p.m. Eastern game, in LA, a reasonable percentage of the year. Not every week, but certainly a good chunk of the season. Like, no one could have been able to plead ignorance of that. Of course, that desire for no night football is going to get smashed if you invite a couple of Pacific time zone schools in the Los Angeles market. I mean, like, that's the whole point. You want the Los Angeles market to get into prime time in your conference. So yeah, it's extremely bizarre. And I think that Kevin Warren, was lazy, but here's the thing, like, he didn't get punished for it. He's not paying a price. Like, he made his money and now he's off to his next deal. In terms of internal Big Ten governance, one has to wonder, what was the process for this overall chain of events? And maybe it was just people looked at the money and didn't really care about the details and at the time, maybe that was it. So it's not as though Kevin Warren was the only person who was lazy. I mean, other people had to persist in that laziness as well in order to allow all of this to happen. So it's hard to make sense of this other than just there was money on the table, people grabbed the money, and details were not attended to at the level that they should have been. That seems like the one reasonable, honest conclusion to all of this.
To your point about the time windows, when you think about it, are you going to relegate two schools in your conference to playing all their games at 3:30 in the afternoon Eastern time? That's what it would be, because they would never play at 7:30. They would never play at 10:30. They can't play at noon Eastern time. So are USC and UCLA going to play at 3:30 in the afternoon Eastern time every week? No. Number one. Number two, there was a lot of sources being quoted or cited in the Pete Thamel article about athletic directors being frustrated and presidents being frustrated and agitated and coaches agitated. Okay, here's my conclusion to all this. The money is going to speak way beyond all of that. Yes, there are going to be frustrated coaches and athletic directors and irritated and pissed off and all that. But you know what? The Big Ten's going to get its money. The Big Ten is not going to miss this opportunity, not going to sacrifice its contract in any such way. They're going to uphold the contract. Maybe there could be some nuance worked in, and some conversations can be had, but NBC is going to deliver, and NBC is also going to have delivered what they need to justify this contract, and the Big Ten is going to pull through. And I think that this is the conclusion of this story. I think is almost null and void, but the functionality within it and the dynamics of it are very interesting and telling, and it's all very valid. But I think the conclusion of it is NBC is going to pay its money, the Big Ten's going to take its money, and they're going to do what the contract says they're going to do.
Checks are going to cash. That's really
Yes.
the bottom line.
So, yeah, exactly. It's yeah. And yeah, I was running through the Big Ten schedule. I was curious to say, okay, well, let's match up the 2022 Big Ten schedule. Obviously, this is minus USC, UCLA, just to see, how would this have most likely fallen in November, with NBC making and I'm not understanding, or I shouldn't say I'm not understanding. I don't know what the rotation of selection of games are. We know on the final weekend of the season, Ohio State and Michigan are going to play at noon on Fox, and that's all there is to it. But I don't know if Fox gets the first selection every week, or if there's some kind of rotation between them and CBS and NBC in terms of that number one game. But regardless, yeah, it's kind of fun and interesting when you can get have the veil pulled and you can see behind the scenes and see the inner workings to a certain extent when there's this kind of a blunder.
And we're not talking about Larry Scott either.
Yeah. Yes, this actually happened in the Big Ten, but in the Big Ten they make a blunder like this and they're still making $7 billion. So
yeah. Well, and at least, the Big Ten has all this gusher of money, coming out of its ears, whereas Larry Scott, wasn't able to make a whole lot of money for the Pac-12. He made it for himself, but not really for everybody else. I mean, there's a slight bump in revenue, but also there were huge costs. And that's a recent story. Scott getting a severance payment of almost $2 million on top of the very large bloated salary he was already pulling in. So he actually has still been in the news cycle, which is never, ever, ever a good thing for the Pac-12. And it makes USC fans that much more relieved that, they're getting out of this conference and they're moving to the Big Ten.
Seems like most people like night games, but we see a few USC fans who do not like the night games. But again, that's up to personal preference.
Well, they don't like they don't like the late night games. I mean, obviously they prefer the 3:30 Eastern, 12:30 Pacific games played in full sunshine, but I don't I don't sense a lot of dislike for playing a 4:30 game in the Coliseum, but it's the late night games, and I think those games are gonna for USC. Now, here's an interesting little nuance. I'm of the belief that you're never gonna see USC play a 7:30 Pacific game at the Coliseum, within the Big Ten framework. Maybe a non-con cupcake, like San Jose State. That would be the only game you might play late at night. But you're not going to see USC play any Big Ten game 10:30 Eastern, 7:30 Pacific. But I do kind of think that UCLA might play a late game because it's not nearly the same brand, and that's a way for the Big Ten to own that later window that has traditionally always belonged to the Pac-12. So that's just a personal thought that USC will never play at 7:30 Pacific in the Big Ten, but UCLA might.
Never?
I think I really don't see it. I mean, maybe against Rutgers, maybe against or maybe a cupcake. Like maybe Big Ten Network will do a USC Nevada week 1 game. Okay, fine, but USC will never play a Big Ten conference game at 7:30 Pacific, and that only UCLA might be occasionally placed into that very late window.
Because to your point, the Big Ten has plenty of games inventory to fill up the other 3 windows. And this is the Big Ten's opportunity to push the Pac-12 out of the way and have a game or 2, but most likely a game, because they only have 2 teams on the West Coast. One game that's going to, not that they can cover that window every week, but 3 to 5 times a season, cover that window and win. They could win the late night, which is a primetime game, considering that there's usually a Pac-12 game that's, of course, it's a watered-down Pac-12 without 2 of its top 4 or 5 brands. And the Big Ten, I don't know, I would think that they would try to squeeze, they're not going to squeeze USC and UCLA dry, but that they would want to go up against all competition with a better game and with better brands at 10:30 Eastern time.
And I think that's where UCLA really fits this picture because, USC is not coming to the Big Ten for second class treatment. And I think that if to the extent that, USC is the driver here and that UCLA is just really a convenient travel partner, but it's because of USC football. That's what drew both USC and UCLA to the Big Ten. It's not really the UCLA's sports brand. Like UCLA is just kind of like the happy passenger that gets to collect a lot more money, pay off its debts, reduce the red ink on the ledger sheet in Westwood. So, I mean, I really find it hard to think that USC is ever going to play a late night game against a Big Ten opponent. I just think that that's going to be a UCLA thing. Also, consider the optics in terms of Big Ten Network showing a UCLA game later at night. You probably don't want UCLA getting too many of the prime placements in the 4:30 Pacific window, and knowing that USC fans really don't like playing late at night. I just don't think that would sit well with anyone at USC being subjected to that any more than absolutely necessary. In other words, that one early season non-conference cupcake, you're playing that in late August or on Labor Day weekend when it's hot. So that makes natural sense for a late night kickoff. The weather wouldn't be nearly as punishing. But like USC hosting Maryland late at night in November, I just don't see it. I think that they're USC Maryland, USC Rutgers, USC Illinois, those basically the games that fit those fit like the third or fourth offerings, and that basically tells me like those would be CBS games, and CBS has the afternoon window. I mean, maybe once in a blue moon, like once every 3 years, maybe the Big Ten will experiment with USC late at night at 10:30 Eastern. So I will walk back the word never, but it's going to be very, very rare for USC to play late night. And I can say this confidently: UCLA will play more late night games within the Big Ten than USC will. Mark your period of time, whether it's 2 years, 4 years, 6 years, a decade. UCLA over a larger period of time will definitely play more 7:30 p.m. Pacific games than USC will against Big Ten opposition. You can mark that down. You can take that to the bank. No doubt in my mind.
The understanding that I have about the Big Ten network contract is that they get to air every team in the Big Ten at least once. And so you see Illinois 4 or 5 times. You see Rutgers 4 or 5 times. You see Ohio State once. You see Michigan once. This past season, they were both against Rutgers on the Big Ten network. And that was the game. And that actually, the Ohio State Rutgers game was the only time all season that a Big Ten network game beat the ESPN game. ESPN won, main ESPN, in the ratings head-to-head. A Ohio State Rutgers game that was like whatever 56-10 beat whatever game was on ESPN at 3:30 in the afternoon.
The Buckeye bump.
Yeah, they bring some folks with them. All right. Yeah, there should be some monumental matchups, we know, but also TV ratings with USC now in the mix as well. All right, Matt, appreciate you so much being here. Everyone, grab the link that was dropped a few times in the chat from Tim, where you can follow Matt directly to Trojans Wire and also Matt's Twitter feed as well, as he drops a ton of knowledge there most days. All right, make it on back here, everyone, to USC Trojans Live. It's at 11 Eastern and 8 Pacific. We will see you back here next Monday. In the meantime, next Sunday is Trojan Conquest Live. And, of course, Anthony Munoz is the special guest coming up on June 4th. So mark your calendars. Matt, we appreciate it. We will see you next week.
Thank you, Mark. Have a great week, everybody.